Good morning to everyone. It's good to see you today. I've decided that this Sunday and maybe some sermons this year, I'm going to cover some of the Proverbs material that I have worked on over the last 3 years. As you know from Brother Dale's State of the Congregation address last Sunday afternoon, one of the works that is done here in our congregation is a YouTube channel called Begin in the Word. It's a channel that you can log in the morning at 6 o'clock, and a video, about a 10-minute video, will pop up, and you can watch that video, and it begins your day in the Word. And they go usually Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and they'll run a couple of weeks, take a week off, run a couple of weeks. And we have thousands of subscribers. Dale talked about it. People all over the world watch it. It's really great work. Jonathan got that going and continues to support it. Brother David submits content to it. I do. Brother Jordan Dancer. It's a good work. Well, because I don't have a lot of free time, I thought I'm going to leverage some of the work I've done in Proverbs and turn that into sermons. And so I've decided to do that. I'm going to give one of those today. The book of Proverbs has changed the way I think. It has reinformed and supported many of the things the old-timers used to say. It is amazing as I study the book, Brother Dale, how many of old sayings of my dad come up. In my mind, as I read a text and I say, Dad used to say that, except he said it this way: don't be a knucklehead. That happens a lot as I study the book. So it's been a real pleasure to study this book. So we're going to do that this morning. The book of Proverbs is actually 5 books. Quite often the case in the Old Testament, there are a collection of books. Psalms is that way. The book of Proverbs that way. The book of Genesis is probably that way. The book of Isaiah is likely that way. There are several books in the Old Testament that are actually collections of books. The book of Proverbs, the first 9 chapters are something like a play, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more in detail in just a moment. The second grouping of Proverbs, chapter 10 through 24, are just random collections of Proverbs grouped by subject that Solomon collected during his reign. Chapter 25 through 29 are the same, except they were collected by Hezekiah and his people, and they're a little bit more specific to the political problems of their time, of Hezekiah's time. Chapter 30 is the Alan Jackson of Proverbs. It is Proverbs for the common man. This fellow starts off and says, I'm just a dummy. So I'm going to share with you some things I find are really amazing. And when you're through with the chapter, you find out he's not that dumb at all. And neither is Alan Jackson, by the way. So that's kind of what chapter 30 is. I call it Proverbs for the common man. And then chapter 30 is that beautiful text about the virtuous woman, which has layers and layers and layers of truth. Well, we're going to be drawing our text this morning from the first book within the book of Proverbs, those first 9 chapters. Those verses are a collection of oracles, you might say, that are provided from Solomon to his son, probably Rehoboam, probably in preparation for Rehoboam to be king, probably. There are multiple characters that speak in that text. There's Solomon. There's whoever the son that he's talking to, the mother, has some verses early in the text. There is a personification of wisdom, a lady that speaks. I call her Lady Wisdom. She speaks early, about chapter 2, and then later on in about chapter 8. There is a personification of folly that speaks. This woman Folly, she speaks early, and then she speaks later in the book. And these work together as if it were, matter of fact, it is written in the form or in the format of a Greek theatrical performance, which I found really amazing as I studied it. Greek theater has a certain structure to it, which was developed in Greek history around 700, 600 BC. Well, what's interesting is Solomon incorporated that structure 400 years before the Greek culture really ever got going. So it may well be, and there's some believe this, I'm not the only one that thinks this might be the case, some may believe that some of Greek theatrical influence came from Solomon, and Solomon was a king that was known all over the world. So that's the structure of this text. Think of it as if you and your wife were going to go to the theater for the evening, and you were going to watch a play. And in this play, the king would stand up and he would have things he would say, and then some woman would get up and she would pretend to be wisdom and she would speak, and then this other woman, Folly, she would speak, and maybe Solomon's mother has some lines that she says. And that's this play that plays out. The book of Proverbs, chapter 1 through 9, is, when compared to the other writings in Proverbs, is more like high scripture, and by that I mean it's very formal. Unlike the other Proverbs, it's written with a lot of structure. The poetry is a lot tighter, a lot more density in the words. It is considered by most that study these things to be high scripture as opposed to, say, the narrative from 1 Samuel. It's very different in that respect. So that's the book. And as you see, I have a collection of quotes there from the first 9 chapters that sort of show you these characters that are speaking. Chapter 1, verse 8, "Hear, my son, your father's instruction, forsake not your mother's teachings." Those are 2 characters that speak. Chapter 1, verse 20, "Wisdom cries aloud in the street, the markets she raises her voice." So here's this female wisdom. And then chapter 9, "The woman folly is loud, she is seductive and knows nothing." So that's the characters that make up this play. I suggest when you read it, try to read it, all of it, in one setting. Read it that way. And when you do, you'll begin to see it. This looks and feels like a performance that Solomon authorized or had put together for his sons. Sometimes he addresses his sons plural, sometimes his sons singular. Anyway, with all of that being said, that's the piece of this book where we're going to draw our text out of this morning. In the first 9 chapters, there's something very specific that's not found in the rest of the book of Proverbs. There are sections that begin with the statement, "my son," sometimes "my sons." And there's a lot of structure to that. They're always the same when he does that. And I have them listed there if you could see them, Proverbs 1, 8, and 9, Proverbs 2, 1, and 5, Proverbs 3, 1, and 2, etc. There's a lot of those. And every time that's mentioned, it's followed by 2 specific kinds of things. First, an instruction, "My son, hear, receive, call out, seek." It's an action that he's calling on his son or sons to follow. And then the second is a way he sort of quantifies what it is he's giving. Receive your father's instruction. Call out for understanding. Search for my ways. That's the third part. It always follows that way. And what that is think like a play. That's the beginning of a new act. That's a new act. Somebody has cleared the stage and now somebody else has come on stage and there's a new act that's going to play out. And that happens throughout the first 9 chapters so that it gives us a structure that looks like this. 11 acts of this play. And these acts begin with Solomon addressing or introducing what's going to happen, and then the characters make a showing, and then Solomon makes some arguments, and the characters make a second showing, and then Solomon makes a conclusion. All of that's very much like Greek theater. And so it's real interesting how that, if you hadn't thought about it or studied that or read about it, that's what these first 9 chapters are. Well, as you go through these 11 acts of this play, each act is divided into scenes. The third act is the second exhortation, and it's divided into 4 scenes within that act. The first scene is the protasis. The second scene is the apodosis, and if you're worried about those are first cousins of the hippopotamus. Not really. Those are fancy words for something we're going to talk about today. And we won't use those words because I have trouble even saying them, but those are fancy words to describe what Solomon's doing logically. The third scene are the 2 tempters that Solomon describes his sons are going to have trouble with, and then the third is concluding summation. So those are the scenes within this particular act of the play. Okay, let's reread the text that we read this morning, and then we'll begin breaking it down. "My son," you see that? New section, new act. "My son, if you receive my words and treasure up my commandments with you, making your ear attentive to wisdom and inclining your heart to understanding, yes, if you call out for insight and raise your voice for understanding, if you seek it like silver and search it for it as if for hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom from his mouth, come knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk in integrity, guarding the paths of justice and watching over the ways of his saints. Then you will understand righteousness and justice and equity and every good path. For wisdom will come into your heart, and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. Discretion will watch over you, and understanding will guard you." I don't know if you noticed as we read that text, but there are 2 very specific things happening. In the first part of the text, the word "if" is used 3 times. If you receive, if you call out, if you seek. If, that's the protasis. Protasis just means it's an if-then statement. The second part of the text, starting there in verse 5, then you will understand. Then you will understand righteousness. Then you will understand the fear of the Lord. It's the then part of the text. It's really not that complicated what Solomon's offering here. This is one big if-then statement. If you do this stuff, then these things will happen. One of the things you learn about the book of Proverbs as you study through it, unlike the rest of the Bible, the book of Proverbs doesn't really think a lot about eternity. There are things in Proverbs that certainly ring true throughout eternity and impact eternity, but Proverbs is mostly about the here and now. It is what my dad used to say, don't be a knucklehead, or he had another way of saying it, bad things happen, and if you're stupid, really bad things happen. That's kind of what's going on in the book of Proverbs. It is telling us how to live life in the here and now and the consequences for what our choices are regarding how we live, pursuing wisdom versus pursuing folly. It is a book of transaction. If you do this, then a transaction will take place. Now, I know those are loaded words, and so I'm going to talk about them in just a moment. In Christianity, we all step away from that idea of our relationship with God being transactional, and we should. Because a transactional relationship with God infers that somehow I've done something that warrants or earns His favor, and that now He owes me. And that's what the idea of transaction means. Larry and I are both in the business world, and we do transactions all the time. And a transaction means I'm going to pay for something, and then I'm going to go down and get it because I've earned it. A transaction infers an exchange of goods or an exchange of services for a fixed value where both parties end up receiving something they should. Okay, so you can see why speaking about Christianity in terms of transaction is something that is not a good way to describe it, because what we receive from God, we receive entirely by grace. There's nothing that we do in terms of earning it that makes Him indebted to us. Now, that's not the same as saying, by the way, you must believe. There is a transaction, so to speak. You must have faith, and that faith is a part of in one respect, a transaction. God rewards that faith. His grace is given to us based on that faith. You must be born again in the waters of baptism. That is when God creates us a new creature. That is a transaction in one respect, so that's not a mistake to refer to that as a transaction. But to think of Christianity generally as, sometimes we say, a checkbox of things I do, and as a result of these things, a transaction occurs where I receive God's good favor. That's not correct. None of that is what's happening in the book of Proverbs. None of that. So when I'm talking about transaction, I am talking about a transaction in a very real way that Solomon has in mind. If you do certain things here in this life, a transaction will happen. There will be a then. If you live according to wisdom, you're going to receive the reward of living by wisdom. If you live according to folly, you're going to receive a transaction based on that folly. One of the things we learn in the book of Proverbs in these first 9 chapters is wisdom is part of the created order. When God created the universe, He wove wisdom into the fabric of creation. Doing things according to wisdom and then being benefited by it is really not much more complicated than following the created order, and good things happen. It rains, plants grow. It's a part of the created order. So that is to some degree as a matter of fact, that's one of Solomon's big arguments. Wisdom is part of the created order, so no surprise if you don't live according to wisdom, bad things will happen. The created order demands you live by wisdom. So, as we think about the if-then and the transaction of wisdom, that is correct. For this life, what's going to happen to you tomorrow is guided by your wise or your foolish choices, and it is a transaction. In terms of the way that Solomon means it. Okay, with that being said, let's think about this first text. If you receive my words, making your ear attentive, inclining your heart, if you call out for insight and raise your voice, if you seek it and search it. Solomon is going to describe the process of listening and learning. And he uses several words to do that, and as he does that, these words define for us what it means to listen and learn. Now, husbands, some of the things I'm going to say are going to absolutely get us in trouble with our wives. I've given this sermon twice, and it has really proven to be true. So get ready. We're about to get in trouble because I don't know about you, but sometimes my wife says, "You're not listening to me," and I'm about to prove that she's right with what we're going to say. I'm not. Solomon is going to prove that. Because listening really involves three things. And that's what we want to think about. That's the first one. If you receive my words, that's the first thing, and treasure up my commandments with you, making your ear attentive to wisdom and inclining your heart to understanding. So there are three steps in listening, and this is really true in life generally. If you want to listen to something, there's really three steps involved in it. Now let's think about those for a moment. Step number one, mechanically, here's how listening works. The ear is like a microphone. It picks up noise. That noise is turned into a digital signal, and that digital signal goes to a sound card. I'm using computer terminology here. It goes to a sound card in your brain called the auditory cortex. Now, it really is very similar to that. Just like your computer has a sound card and a microphone that plugs into it, that's what's happening. Now, here's what's amazing about your auditory cortex and that sound card. There are actually subroutines within that, software routines within that, that can ignore sounds or focus on certain sounds. Let me give you an example. Years ago, I had a 1975 Dodge Dart. It was a brown Dodge Dart, had a 318 automatic transmission. It was clean. I bought it up in Nichols Hills, got it for a steal, and it was a really good car. I mean, it would have sat right by your Nova and looked at home. It really would have. And I fiddled around and got rid of that car, like so many other stupid things I did, knucklehead things I did. Anyway, that car started making a noise. It was coming from the engine. And so, I couldn't afford to pay somebody to repair it, so I got out there in the garage and opened it up. And there's a lot of racket when a car runs, right? A lot of racket, exhaust and this and that and lifters, all that. But there was this one noise, and it was a sort of a tapping noise like that. Now, if you're a mechanic, that's a problem. That could be a lifter, that could be a rod knocking, that could be a number of things. And so I zoned in and I listened very carefully, and all the other noises went away. The subroutine within my sound card put every other sound on mute, including some important information that Han had told me when she stepped out into the garage. I heard it, but I did not perceive it. I was doing exactly what she says I do sometimes. I was not listening. Now, I will tell you that fortunately the human brain is an amazing thing, and there are software updates, and my software has updated since then. And so there is a subroutine now that usually works. When she speaks, immediately all other sounds are turned off, and that doesn't always work, but that's what's supposed to work. Anyway, that sound. Okay, what am I going to do with that sound? I hear that sound, but all that's happened so far is I've just received that sound, and I'm counting that sound as valid or important. That's what the auditory cortex does. It hears something and says, that's important. Okay, so I hear that sound in my car, and that's important. It's a knocking sound, shouldn't be there. But if that's all that happens, nothing's really happened yet, right? Something else has to happen with that. And so the brain does a second thing. The brain has the left frontal lobe that begins to analyze what you've heard, and it compares it to other similar things. It is, if you will, the data storage part of the brain. It's where that sound now goes up to the left frontal lobe, and it begins to say, have I heard this sound before? Oh yeah, I heard that sound on my 74 Dodge pickup, which was a 360 but the same block, and it was a very similar sound. And I know what it was on that. I had a rod bearing that was bad. And so I had to pull the engine and replace the rod bearing, and that's what that sounded like. So I said, I'm going to have to go get an engine kit and rebuild this engine. And so I went down, my dad helped me, and I bought a rebuild kit for that 318 and pulled it out and went through the process of rebuilding it, because my brain had begun to analyze that information and compare it to other things. Now, Solomon is telling us something. This is not about Dodge Darts. This is about how to listen. Solomon is telling us a big if. If you want the thens that we're going to talk about a little bit, this is the if. Here comes wisdom. The software better be listening. It better mute other things. And now you need to compare that piece of information with other, analyze it, compare it, assess it. Now that's that second part where you're paying attention. Pay attention, son, I'm talking to you. I've heard that one a time or two. Get the, what did our fathers used to say, Ronnie, get the wax out of your ears? Yeah. Listen, pay attention. That's that second step. I've heard it. I understand it's valuable, and now I've got to catalog the information. I'm going to do things with it. That's what Solomon's telling us it takes to listen. And right about now, wives are saying, and that's where he stops right there. He heard it, but he's not paying attention to it. Yeah, and your kids, and that happens a lot in life, right? Well, that's that second step. That means I'm paying attention. I'm paying attention. I'm being attentive to what I've heard. I'm comparing it to other things. It's beginning to matter to me, right? The third step. Now I got to lean into it. I'm going to incline. That's the word incline means to do that. I'm going to lean into what I've heard. This is where it begins to involve the right frontal lobe, where I analyze it. Yeah, that was like that Dodge pickup, but is it exactly like that Dodge pickup? Well, it's a little bit different, but maybe it's the same. And so I ignored that it was a little bit different. And right about the time I had the heads pulled off, the pan pulled off, and everything else, I found that the harmonic balancer on the front of the engine was loose. That's all it was. I already had the rebuild kit bought and the engine all tore apart. It was too late then. I rebuilt the engine, but I didn't know, I didn't need to. I could have just bought a 1 1/8 inch torque socket and wrench, gone over there and tied up the harmonic balancer and drove it and probably still be driving it because I love that car. So I spent a bunch of money and I heard it, I analyzed it, but I didn't spend time leaning into it, really analyzing it. What does this mean? I know what it means, but what does it mean to me? How do I feel about it? And what we're describing here, what Solomon is describing to us, is you don't just hear it, you don't just pay attention to it, but you focus on it. Okay, God's wisdom is bound up in this book. Your software has to say, wait, the book's being read, let me turn off everything else and hear this. Now let me pay attention to it, and now let me lean into it. What does it mean? No, what does it mean to me? How does this affect me? What Solomon is giving us is what I call the proper operating system for the brain. Our grandkids are old enough now to begin to have disagreements about whether or not it's Apple or Android. And we're hearing about this a lot when they come over to the house. iOS versus Android. iOS versus Android. And everybody has an opinion about that, and everybody that likes iOS is wrong, so there. I told Silas, just walk up to whoever you're arguing with and go, we are the droid. Yeah, that's an old commercial. So anyway, and then you talk about PC versus Linux versus the Apple operating system. I think it's iOS on a computer also. Operating system, right? Well, the Christian brain, the people of God should have an operating system in your brain. And that operating system is not just installed, you have to learn it. And that operating system is exactly what Solomon just described. This operating system is called the Logos. It is the learning to take wisdom, hear it, analyze it, what does it mean to me, and it becomes the platform on which all the rest of your life is based. You install another piece of software, it gets installed on top of that operating system. That is your operating system. That's what Solomon says the first if is. If wisdom is your operating system, what does it mean to you as the final step? That's what it must be. That's the first step in listening. The second step, learn. You got to learn. Now, I learned from my Dodge Dart experience to get a second opinion and trust the second opinion, because I was told by somebody dear to me that I don't think that's a rod. And that was my father standing there listening at it with me. And I should have paid attention to him as he stood there. He said, son, I don't think that's a rod knocking. That doesn't sound like a rod to me. And he was right, it wasn't. It was a harmonic balancer loose on the front of the engine. Well, what happens is when I go through the process of hearing it, tuning into it, analyzing it, and leaning into it, what happens, it becomes my ethos. Think of that as ethic, my truth. I am so tired of turning on your favorite social platform or news or something else and hearing somebody say, that's my truth. What that means is I don't want to believe really what is true, and so I'm going to make up something and I'll choose to believe it even though I really know it's not true. Well, Solomon's talking about the real concept of your truth can only come after you've listened, paid attention to, analyzed, and leaned into the Logos. That's when you begin to have your truth. And when you do that, then your truth becomes your ethic, your ethos. It's the way your operating system begins to perceive the world around you. The words used there, seek out and raise, are the two words used throughout the Old Testament to describe kings who were in trouble in battle, and they would seek out help, or they would call out for help. They would call out for help in battle. Because you begin to perceive that I need this. This is what's true in life, and this is my ethic. I've got to pursue this. You will not receive the benefits of wisdom if you don't go through this process. Learning wisdom, listening to it, and then it becoming your truth. What's in you. That's your ethos. It defines the way you see the world. And then number 3, he says, if you seek it like silver and search for it as hidden treasures. If something is a treasure to you, it means you hold it valuable. It means something, right? You got money in the bank, why, that's important. If you've got, some people store gold in their house. That's how they keep their wealth. It's very valuable. You see, and think of the pearl of great price. Jesus may have had this proverb in mind when he gave that parable. Man sold all he had and searched for it because he perceived it to be valuable. What happens is, as you begin to work the Logos operating system and it becomes your truth, it becomes not just truth to you, but it becomes the way you feel, your pathos. Think of pathos as pathetic or empath or empathy. It's how you feel about a thing. And so you work and study God's Word, you search for wisdom, you seek it, you pursue it. It becomes your operating system. And as it becomes your operating system, it becomes your truth, your pathos in life. And as that happens, then it informs the way you feel about the world around you. Here's the problem. Our feelings run so deep, and they do, with the way we feel about things, that a lot of us do this in reverse. Something will happen to me, and it makes me mad. And I feel hurt. So then, I say, that's not right. My ethos has been violated because my pathos felt hurt. And then I go find my concordance, because I don't read the Bible very regular, and I look up the word angry or offend, and I find the verse that, there it is. There's the Logos to support my ethos because of the way my pathos felt. That is very dangerous. That's how false doctrine is created. That's how we justify bad behavior. That's how men like Hitler killed millions in the name of doing good. The way he felt about a thing defined his Logos. If you're doing that, you're absolutely opposite of what you should be. Real wisdom begins with logic, thinking, understanding truth, analyzing it. It's the hard work. Yes, it is. It is hard work, and it takes a long time to do. You analyze it, but then it becomes your truth. Then it informs the way you see the world. It is your truth. So then when somebody does something to make you angry, the very first question you'll ask is, am I right to be angry? Maybe I'm wrong. Let me go rethink my Logos. Let me rethink my ethos. Let me rethink my pathos. Or, yes, I'm justified in this anger. What does the Bible say about this? You see it totally opposite the way so many in this world operate. They operate the opposite. That's what Solomon is saying regarding if. If, and I'm going to shorten everything I've just said by saying, if Logos is your operating system, if that's how you approach life, I think, which informs what I hold to be true, which informs how I feel, and then ultimately how I'll act, which is the then part of this. And you'll hear me pray that quite often. That His Word should inform how we think, how we feel, and how we act. That is Solomon's operating system. That's the if for the then that we're about to talk about. If Logos is your operating system, then here's the transaction. Here are the things that the created order will naturally deliver to you. God will naturally deliver. And He describes them as two things. Then you will understand and the fear of the Lord, and then you will understand righteousness and justice and the other things. Then two things will happen. There's two results of that three-step if process. There are two results that will happen. Then you'll understand God. Then you will be armed to practice good behavior. Not because of how you feel, but because of how you think and how that informs the way you feel, what you hold to be true. Okay, so let's think about the first one. Then you will understand the fear of the Lord. Find the knowledge of God. Then you will understand the fear of the Lord. First of all, this is a process, not a destination. Nobody will ever have a complete understanding of the fear of the Lord. Now, I want you to think about fear of the Lord and understanding God in a little bit different way. Let's substitute the word God. I don't mean anything disrespectful by this, but helping us understand. Let's substitute the word for a phrase. Then you will understand what matters. You will understand high truth. You'll understand the defining issues. You'll understand, let's use this word, everything. Because that's what God is. God is the great I am. Wes mentioned that on Wednesday night. God is the great I am. He is everything. Everything. If you understand God, you understand everything. And that's a process, not a destination. Nobody's ever going to finally get there. But we're going to work on it. That's what the Logos operating system will deliver this. Now, let me ask you, how would it be if you understood everything, Tripp? Wow, what a thing, right? Like, wow, I would understand those basketball plays and I would understand how the tax code works and I would understand everything. That's what it means to understand God. You can understand everything, and that begins with understanding the fear of the Lord. That's the then of this process of the Logos operating system. You think you understand everything? You think you got it figured out? If you haven't gone through the Logos operating system, you're fooled. That's what you are. You don't. You're living life by your feelings, and you will be led astray. If you want to understand this world and what goes on in this world, the if is the Logos operating system. Now, the fear of the Lord, and I hear people say, well, that means the respect of God. It does mean that, but it means more. It means to be terrified. If you go through and research every time the word fear of the Lord or fear of God is used in the Bible, it's very clear. There are times it means to be terrified. And let's just talk about that for a moment. God, who is bigger than the universe, you and I are nothing on top of nothing on top of nothing compared to Him. God could, at His will, snuff us out of existence. He could, and He would be right to do so because He is the definition of right. God could cast upon you a life of the most miserable suffering anybody could imagine. He could do that, and He would be right to do that. And you think about what God could do, and there's only one place to end up when you begin to think about that. And that's what the Logos operating system will bring you to. When you begin to read what God has done and the standard of His righteousness, and you begin to understand that and drink it in and hear it and pay attention to it and analyze it, and it becomes your truth. When you do that, you begin to say, whoa. What a thing to fall into the hands of that God. Yeah, you ought to be afraid. You ought to be. Because He is an awesome and mighty God. That's the first thing the Logos operating system will give you is perspective. Perspective about who you are and who God is and the fear of the Lord. And that's just the beginning of the transaction. How would it be to have that kind of understanding? But then it begins and empowers you to find the knowledge of God. I am somewhat this way. Jonathan and Hannah are much more this way, and so maybe some of you will know what I mean is when we go to Barnes & Noble, which is a big bookstore, and you walk in, and Brooklyn is this way, and some of the grandkids are this way. You walk in, and the eyes get this big. And all they want to do is go get a cup of coffee, find a book, and sit down and start reading, right? Because there's so much knowledge in that store, and it's a good store if you like to read. Now, I feel that way a little bit about libraries. My biggest problem is I can't read to myself. It's like not reading at all. I have to read out loud in order for me to understand things. I don't know if you notice sometimes when I preach, I will study to myself quietly, and then when I get up here, I'll read a text, and it's the first time I've read the text out loud, and it starts choking me up. It's because I think in some ways it's the first time I really understand it. So that's a thing with some of us. We're a little bit slower than the rest of you, and we have to read things out loud to get them. So when I show up at a library, I feel that way. I went to the Library of Congress, man, I was just like, wow, look at all the knowledge that's here, but they're going to frown on me going and pulling a book off the shelf and reading it out loud. So that's a little bit of a problem. Imagine if you go through the that now you have at your disposal the knowledge of God, which means the knowledge of everything. The understanding of everything, the knowledge of everything. That's what you're working toward when you install the Logos operating system. And then you realize a God of such awesomeness and love wouldn't leave us in the dark. He would give us something, and the reading of this book begins to reveal to us that this is the Logos operating system, His written word. Watch how he says it. The Lord gives wisdom. How does He give it? Does He give it to you through some magical, listen, you've been given wisdom? Nope. The Lord gives wisdom, from His mouth come knowledge and understanding. A parallel phrase describing the same process. Wisdom comes from His mouth. His mouth is in this book. What He says is here, the Word of God. That's what happens when you install that Logos operating system. You begin to realize the answers to everything are here, what you need. And it creates a hunger and a desire in your ethos and your pathos, so that you finally reach a point where He is a shield to those who walk in integrity, guarding the paths of justice and watching over the ways of the saint. It becomes a decision-making tool for you. How do I figure this out? How do I do this? Wednesday night, Wes spoke, and I got to watch the video, and I really enjoyed the sermon. And Wes brought out a text that says there in Exodus regarding God speaking to the children of Israel from the mountain. So he said, "You have seen how I have talked with you. You have seen how I have talked with you." And Wes observed, and didn't really bring it to conclusion because there's probably a lot of study to go into that, but he observed that that's a little bit of an odd thing to say, to see how you talked. In other words, you would think I would hear how you talked. But the text says, I have seen how you. Now, I don't know what the consequences of that text are. I don't, Wes. But I am really intrigued about it. And by the way, that is part of what it means to exegete a verse. You read a verse and then you ask a question. What's going on there? Why is it said that way? The Holy Spirit doesn't do anything by accident. There's a meaning to it. There's some truth in that. One of these days, something's going to come up. And Wes has this Logos operating system running. It's his truth, and he wants it to be. Some issue's going to come up, some complexity, some problem, and that verse is going to pop up. And it's going to be just what you needed as a shield, or to help you walk in integrity, or to guard your path. It's going to be just what you need because you've gone through the if. You've worked all the if, and now you're receiving the then. Well, that's the first then of this statement that he gives. The second then you will understand. Now, this is where he begins to describe you'll be armed to practice good behavior. So you're going to be armed, or you're going to be equipped to understand God, to know God. That's the first part of it. And the second part is now you're going to be armed to practice good behavior. And let's think about those phrases. He says, then you will understand righteousness and justice and equity, every good path. Those 4 words, those 4 phrases are just amazing. We should think about them for a second. You will understand righteousness, right and wrong. When we're young, we think we've got that figured out. We know what's right and what's wrong, and then life goes by. And you're faced with so many complicated problems. And there is a right, there is a wrong, but we become like this guy here with the 2 faces. We don't know which way to go. I go this way, go that way, what's right, what's wrong. And then our professors in college tell us it's all gray and there is no truth, and Satan is yelling that at us all the time so that we begin to believe there is not a right or a wrong, and the next thing you know, our head is just on a swivel. We don't know what to do. Not for the person who's installed the Logos operating system. One of the thens is they will understand righteousness. I am pretty sure that the Hebrew author had this text open when he wrote, talking about the Word of God and how those that by reason of use and exercise have created within them the ability to discern good and evil. And that's what this means. Be able to understand when a thing is right and wrong. Well, the day is coming, friend, where you're going to have a problem in your family, some situation that is ripping your guts out, and you don't know what to do. If you want to be ready for that moment, if you install the Logos operating system, then when that moment comes, you're going to have some confidence in understanding righteousness. It may not make it easy. It may not mean it's the easy thing to do, but you're going to know what the right thing to do is. If you haven't done that and you're living life based on your feelings, you're about to create a disaster in your life because you're going to act on your feelings, and I promise you, when it matters, your feelings are usually wrong. Now, that's a problem. If, only if, gives you that then, that you'll be ready for that moment. The second one, justice. Some of you, I have been asked to serve on a jury. Some of you are in the law enforcement world, and you have depositions and other things to make. I've served on 2 different juries. Justice, and this word here has in view politically, talking about justice in a political sense. You know, how is justice served in society when somebody's done something wrong? Solomon had that. 2 women brought to him a baby, if you remember the story, and both of them claimed that the baby was theirs. Solomon understood how to determine justice because he had installed this wisdom operating system. He's one of the most wisest men that ever lived. Justice. When you get the notice to serve on a jury, don't be afraid. If you've installed the Logos operating system, don't be afraid. You have been prepared by God for that moment. You've been prepared to say, I think I can hear the evidence and render justice. Now, if you're just going to do it on your feelings and your instincts and your hunch, throw that letter away. You're not ready. If you haven't spent time in the Word of God, understanding who God is, if you don't look at God and tremble just a little bit, throw the letter away. You're not ready. If you want to be ready for that moment to understand what's just and what is not just, the Logos operating system. That's the if to this then. The second one, equity, and that has to do with money. Most of us have bought and sold things through the years. I sold that Dodge Dart for $350. Guy got it, tinkered on it a little bit, and sold it for $2,500. He lived out in Bridge Creek. I remember him. Equity. What's it worth? You hire somebody to come assess the value of your house. You know that's in the news right now. A big case in the public courts right now is a businessman in New York had his property assessed, and there were different assessments, and they borrowed money against it, and there's a lot of disagreement about that. Well, it's complicated to do. It is hard to do, and it ends up in court a lot because it's difficult to understand just exactly what is something worth. What's the equity of something? That's why we hire appraisers to come appraise the value of our house. What's it worth? What should it sell for before we even put it on the market? We do that for a very good reason, and a bank wants to know that information because they're only going to loan you maybe 80% of that value because they want to make sure they're leveraged on the right way against that equity. Brother Dale presented it last Sunday night, a lot of things about the financial equity involved in our congregation. Equity's a big deal. People go to college and earn degrees as actuaries, and they make a lot of money. I'm sorry, Randy and Diane's daughter is an actuary. I don't know if she makes a lot of money, but she's very skilled. She's an actuary, I believe, for an insurance company. Those are the people that figure out what the real value is, and they're very skilled. It's a very skilled thing. The Logos system is the beginning of understanding value in a physical way. What is something really worth? If you want to understand the equity in your life, what's valuable and what's not, the Logos operating system. The third one, or the fourth one, every good path. Which way do I go? Do I go to OCCC or do I go to OU? This boy has asked me out on a date. Should I go with him or is he a loser? You got to make those decisions. What's the good path? If you're going to go by your feelings, David, I'm going to apologize to you because I just think Star Wars is awful in this respect. Trust your feelings, Luke. No, don't. They will lead you wrong, Luke. Your feelings lead you down the wrong way. Trust your logic. That's why I'm a Star Trek guy. Spock has got it right. Trust your logic. Trust the Word. It's the operating system you should go by. Don't trust your feelings, for heaven's sake. Think it through. What's the right decision? Your feelings will lead you wrong. Let your feelings be informed by what you learn from God. Which path do I take? Is it time to move out of the house? Maybe I should stay at home. All of those kinds of decisions, a million of them. Should I accept this job? Or am I good in the job I've got? Million decisions that life has given us. Solomon's wisdom, when installed and operated properly, is the way to make those decisions. The second then, or the second part of that, then for wisdom will come into your heart, and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul, which means second nature. It will be your second nature. You know, you want to say, I have that intuition to make decisions. No, you don't, unless this is how you got it, because that's what this is talking about. Wisdom will come into your heart. It will become your discerning tool. It will become your intuition. It will be natural to you to know what decision to make, to understand what is right and wrong. When I was an apprentice plumber back in 1982, 81, 82, 83, I worked under a journeyman plumber who was, there's no other person quite like this fellow. Some of you know him, Brother David Myers, Christian man. And we would drive to Elk City a lot because there was a lot of work up there during the oil boom. And we would drive up there, and I would sit in that old beat-up, wore-out Dodge truck in the passenger side, and David would drive along. And we always had a bag of fittings in the middle between us, you know, half-inch L's and nipples and T's and all fittings, pipe fittings. And David would make me close my eyes and pick up a fitting and tell him what it was. Is that a 3/4 L? Is that a 1/2 by 3/4 T? All of that means something. You got to understand it, you know, what it means technically. It's a technology or a technical learning that you have to have. I pick it up, eyes closed. Then he would make me take a fitting and a nipple and screw them together and take them apart with my eyes closed. And I would do that all the way down Highway, whatever it is, 287, to Elk City. And all the way back, all the while saying, this man has lost his mind. And if you knew him, you would say, yeah, you might have thought that. And then one day, we were doing a strip center on Tamarack Road in Altus, Oklahoma, the people that were building it were from California, and I am really glad they went bankrupt. And those of you in the construction business know exactly what I mean. That was a good thing they went bankrupt. And I don't remember all the details, but I had to screw a 2-inch steel pipe into a fitting about 100 feet away, and I couldn't see it. Now, we had guides, and we stabbed the pipe in through the end of the building, stabbed it in, got it in there, had the pipe dope on it and everything. It was ready. And then I'm up on the ladder because David was too chicken to get on the ladder, and I'll tell him that. And I had to get that pipe, and you know what I did? I closed my eyes. And I felt that thread. It's like I was looking at it. And I turned it, and it wasn't started right, and I backed it up, and I screwed that pipe in. We put an air test on it, and it held. And that laundromat is still there today. You know why that worked for me? Because I drove down the road putting fittings together with my eyes closed. He wasn't such a knucklehead after all. He knew what he was doing. I had learned what the right thing feels like. I didn't just think I knew. I had learned through practice and diligence and study what the right thing feels like this guy under the floor of the house there putting 2 fittings together. That's what wisdom becomes if you install the Logos operating system and if you follow what Solomon's been teaching us. That's the then you will get. Someday, something will come up and you will intuitively know the right path. It will come to you. Wisdom will come into your heart, and not until then, and don't be deceived. Your feelings won't deliver that to you. Only the Logos operating system. Finally, the last statement, discretion will watch over you, understanding will guard you. Both of those words are words very similar to anchor. Solomon was the only king to ever establish a navy for Israel. And in the navy, they had ships, and it wasn't a huge navy, but they did do it. They traded all over the Mediterranean world as far away as Spain and Greece and other places. The archaeology on that is really impressive. And the word used here is a word somewhat like the word for anchor and chain. It's something that anchors you. It'd be like a light pole. We've got light poles around our neighborhoods, and they've got those wires going down that are tied to that thing in the ground. What's down there in the ground is a big block of concrete that's tied to. So when our Oklahoma winds come through, that light pole can stand, right? It can stand against that strain. Structural engineers actually figure that stuff out from OG&E, and that's what they do. Well, that's what Solomon is saying, is that discretion that we learn will watch over you, understanding will guard you, so that when you get that phone call that your child was in a car wreck, or you get that pink slip in the mail that you lost your job because your company doesn't have the courage to tell you in person, or the doctor comes in and says, the baby's going to be fine, but I don't think she's going to make it. Those times that are crushing in life, that you don't think you can stand, the Logos operating system will anchor you because it's certain and it's sure. Nothing else will. Your feelings will leave you empty, vacant, and a mess. This does not come easy. This comes only after years of commitment and dedication to understanding God, listening, turning off the other things, focusing on it. Then, things will start happening for you in ways that are almost automatic, but only then. Hope you've enjoyed the study of the morning. I am loving the study of Proverbs, and I hope that as we cover this over maybe some of the next months to come, you'll enjoy it too. We're going to sing an invitation song. That song is designed to encourage you to come to the Lord. We have water ready. We can assist you in baptism if you want to request the prayers of the church. However we can assist you, if you'll come forward to the front, have a seat, we'll assist you while we sing the song that's been selected.